Microsoft. I was at Google at the time with the goal of funding, well, we'll just jump to the interesting parts, catalyzing security improvements across open source and open source ecosystems, of which FreeBSD is definitely one. And we've been quite busy since 2022. Our sort of the alpha omega came from an original model of sort of how to think about the problem, fat head, long tail. It's really come to mean solutions that can work through points of leverage, or solutions that will sort of just naturally scale through just pouring money into compute. Spoiler, the scale part is really hard. There are just all these pesky humans in the way who actually are maintainers of things, and throwing automated solutions at all of those code and giving them things doesn't really work. So we're still working on it. In fact, looking at it from a point of view, how do we scale through the humans? How do we help the humans scale the work that they're doing so that the graph of humans is not overwhelmed? But the leverage stuff has been working out very well. And in fact, we've raised a lot of money. We continue to raise money. We're now joined by AWS, Google, Microsoft, and Citi, all of whom are members. And this is just a subset of the sort of projects we've worked with to donate money. And I have whole talks on how this whole stuff works. It really comes down to a few basic things. If you make it someone's job to worry about security in a particular ecosystem, and that person is well integrated in that ecosystem, good things happen. If you don't, if it's nobody's job it is, or it's a little bit disparate across everybody else, the tragedy of the commons plays out very quickly, and security in particular becomes something that everybody worries about, nobody's very good at, and doesn't really get done the same way. From points of leverage, package repositories are the app stores of software development. And they are choke points for policy. They are vectors for attack, cyber attacks, just straight on the infrastructure, but also name squatting, AI slop, all kinds of other things. The fun little tidbit, the AIs have now started hallucinating package names across ecosystems. So when you ask it for guidance on a package to do something here, it'll give you a package name that doesn't exist in your ecosystem. Well, those 404s that are hitting up the package repositories are now nuclear waste, because they are essentially the next name squatting attack in the making. And so the overload of infrastructure work on the space is going up, and we're trying to fund improvements there. Category C really is actually the beginning of every organization's journey towards security starts with an audit. And I can't tell you how many times we've had someone come to us with a proposal saying, we've got this great thing, please give us $2 million, we're going to go build a thing, we're going to hire people to do so. And I'm like, when was the last time you did an audit? And like, we don't need an audit, we need to build this thing. I'm like, go on. And so we love starting with audits. We actually started with the FreeBSD by doing audits. And it helps us understand how an organization and its community are ready to go off and tackle their journey of security, and how to build confidence and trust that we can give them more money to go off and do things. We're not very hands-on. It's more holding hands than hands-on. We like to work with organizations that can then take on the onus of whatever goals they have, and all the execution and all the hiring and firing and program management around it that needs to happen. And then lastly, look, this space is terrifyingly new given how big a problem it is. I like to joke it's sort of like the Y2K problem, for those of us old enough to remember, but without the same clarity of problem, solution, or date. Well, part of today's talk is about how that's changing a little bit. But just a quick look, in 2024, we funded audits of Beehive and Capiscum. And earlier this year, Deb and I gave a talk at, which summit was it? The Open Source Summit, just about the lessons learned within the FreeBSD community, including, holy crap, we just did an audit. It turns out that was a lot of work to deal with of all the things that happened. And how do we do that in the future? And how do we make sure that we're not leaking 0 days, or how long do we hang on to those 0 days? And the response to audits is a coordination and a program management and an engineering, and it's time and energy everywhere problem. In 2025, one of the things that we funded is what we call beach cleaning. And I'm going to go around with sort of a little history story here. if you recall the XZ-utils problem, right? There was a single maintainer, allowed somebody else to come in to maintain it. Why? Because they were overloaded and looking for help. And this person came in and created an interesting situation of being able to inject malware in. And honestly, they did it pretty incompetently. And if they were a little bit more competent, we'd be having a whole different set of conversations today. But that made me think about how we are thinking about our problems of scale and how we think about our problems of risk. And what occurred to me and what became very clear was open source projects are actually just as bad as the corporations that many of you represent that we love to complain about that just take open source as free, thank you, got it, everything's great, right? We tend to take those external packages, npm install foo. How much review do we do on foo? How much do we care about foo? Foo's code is perfect. It's solving my problem here, therefore it's perfect, right? And one of the extra forces in the universe that Einstein didn't figure out was that of a software engineer at an insurance company trying to get tab A into slot B and a Stack Overflow article telling them npm install foo, and the top answer saying, don't do this, it's a malware. If it makes tab A go into slot B, they're doing it. And so those forces didn't align well, right? They created situations that create problems. And what I realized was that we need to start looking, not auditing all the code, that's definitely a thing, but we need to look at the health of the projects we're using. How well are they able to handle vulnerabilities? Not do they have vulnerabilities, not everybody has vulns, right? And we had tried some scale efforts. We were trying to find all the vulnerabilities in the top 3,000 packages in Python, and then find all the ones in the transitive closure across those 3,000 packages, which was surprisingly not 30,000. And we did that work, and did some things and came back, and it was like going out to the Pacific garbage patch with a boat, somewhere between rowboat and aircraft carrier, and coming back with a pile of garbage. Sounded good. We spent some money and there's a pile of garbage, but the Pacific garbage patch is still out there. It's huge, and nobody could do anything different in their day-to-day jobs because of what we'd done. And so the beach cleaning said, let's go focus on one project and its dependency graph and make sure that its graph of things it depends upon are healthy and good shape in all the ways that we care about. So we started with Airflow, and it was incredibly impactful. It changed how the Airflow engineering community focused its efforts, how vendors who turn Airflow into money through cloud products or various things like that prioritized their investment. And we developed a framework called the 3 Fs. We either fix, fork, or forget about it. And, you have to make choices about what you're using. So FreeBSD has an interesting set of dependencies inside its code, not organized through package management, but just sitting there as vendor libraries in the code, some of which is updated more frequently than others, some of which may not be clear as to who owns it or maintains it. And so an audit of that process and how how FreeBSD looks at its dependency graph in that sense is going to be really interesting. And that work is ongoing, I believe. Blame Ed if it doesn't work. So why is this stuff so hard? And we'll start with the decades of tech debt. We'll get into some of the institutional things, which I want to talk about with you as representatives from vendors who may or may not be allocating the resources you'd like them to do the job well. There's a little bit of prisoner's dilemma, right? Why do various entities, including commercial ones, not go and help financially or resource-wise to a project they're using? Well, because their competitors aren't. Why would I do it? Why would I pay for them to get those features, right? And most organizations find some balance, not all, but it makes the net new cost. And that's another thing, right? We've been achieving a sort of balance, an equilibrium of investment that match to businesses' outcomes, project success in various ways. And now there's this new looming problem that we don't have an equilibrium for. We don't have the right allocation of resources. It's a new thing, and it takes time for organizations to care. There's also a great article I would recommend by Phil Venables called The Asymmetry of InfoSec Investment. And it's the classic thing, right? You spend money on security because you know you have a problem. You spend that money, OK, we got fewer problems showing up. A few years later, some bright spark MBA says, why are we spending all this money on security, right? We've all had that conversation and wanted to hurt someone. Another element here is, and this is more true in sort of complex webs of packages and dependencies is that you don't control the whole graph. And so let's say, did I do something wrong? Am I being voted off the island? It is, yeah. I'll just turn my screen around. We'll go old school. Can I have the screen back if I ask really nicely? It says no signal? All right, well, it worked. Well, fortunately, I'm going to keep talking about the same slide anyway. So let's say that you are at the top of this graph of things, or downstream from a whole bunch of things. Metaphors are hard here. And there's a vulnerability showing up in some package 3 levels deep. And unfortunately, the package that is bringing it into your world, let's call it 2 levels deep, can't pick up the update, or hasn't picked up the update. What do? Do you maintain a downstream fork of everything in your graph so that you can update the versions? Well, that's a lot of work. Now you're doing a lot of the maintenance for all these things, right? Especially since their build processes are opaque and weird and painful, right? In FreeBSD, the monorepo helps a lot there, but it also creates a situation where the update is not as Dependabot automatic as you might like it to be. We did some research. People using Dependabot tend to live pretty close to head with their dependencies right up until the time when an update from one of the dependencies breaks the build and it's not fixed trivially. If they can fix it trivially, then great, they'll do it. If not, more likely, they'll just freeze, pin at the old version, and move on and not pick up any fixes. So imagine that spread through a deep web of dependencies. You get a logjam. It's really hard to move things forward. So it's a bit of a tragedy of the commons. But I just wanted a disclaimer. Having talked about supply chain security, I'm not going to show the inevitable XKCD that everybody else has to do so. So how does this all happen from a corporation's point of view, right? So if you're doing a startup, any stage startup you want, right? This is what your strategy looks like. We're going to grow usage. We're going to grow revenue. We'll do some enterprise and privacy features. And are we going to do security? Sure, maybe not. Right? That is literally every startup I've ever been in. Why? Because security won't help your business survive. Literally, even if it is a security-oriented software business. The things that help your business grow and survive are growth, then revenue, and then some enterprise features allow you to sort of expand more growth into more markets. Right? But let's say you are a megatech corporation. What do your priorities look like? Grow revenue, expand to new markets, reduce costs, improve customer satisfaction. And security comes when it is necessary to protect whatever local monopoly or market you've achieved, and no more. It's very hard to prioritize security work in large organizations. So as a whole, the industry has progressed largely crisis by crisis. So when Log4Shell happens or exeutil happens, everyone goes, oh my God, the end of the world, we must do something. And a whole bunch of investment, money flows. Honestly, Alpha Omega was funded, its initial seed money was funded in response to a crisis. And by luck and timing, we were able to make it be effective enough. And also, guess what? The industry keeps delivering crisis after crisis about every 18 months in some dimension or another, right? But it's hard for organizations to manage it well that way. So what's going to change this? Right? How's it going to change? Well, the EU has entered the chat. Right? There's some legislation that is approved and done in the EU, is now going through the rules-making process called the CRA, the Cyber Security Resilience Act. And as the EU has learned, right, if you don't have really good enforcement on this legislation, large corporations have a long-standing habit of negotiating their outcomes. Right? So the CRA has a lot in it. How many people here are familiar with the CRA? Oh, this is perfect. So please tell me what you know about it, because I don't know shit. But in a nutshell, and there's a lot of details here, right? They want people to start building software that is secure by default, right? Sounds reasonable. There's lots of things in terms of what they mean by that, but shipping a thermostat that has all of its ports open and allows it to be widely attacked by the outside by any idiot, so it can become part of a botnet attacking France's nuclear reactors, is not secure by default. They also want manufacturers, and this is a concept they define. They define a manufacturer as pretty much anything you can imagine that has software in it, right? And they want them to be held accountable full life cycle. No, we've abandoned this product now. No matter, let's say you have a thermostat being used in 1 million homes, but you've got version 2, it's much better. Do I have to keep maintaining version 1? Yes, you do. And if you don't, bad things happen. And of course, you could say, well, we'll just pretend we don't know about these things, and we'll lie. And so the transparency and reporting piece comes in. You have to be an active participant in the process, including reporting on the vulnerabilities that you've discovered or have been reported to you, so that the various agencies are not surprised by something happening. So, what makes this stick? It's the classic global revenues game that the EU has played in the past. If you want to do business in the EU, if you are doing business in the EU, and all of you are building software, you are subject to these rules. And it kicks in 2027. So if you're not already preparing for this now, if there's one takeaway to take away, let's go back to your teams and say, who in my organization is dealing with the CRA situation? This wacko Michael told me to scared shitless about it. What am I supposed to do, right? And the answer is going to be you're going to have to do a bunch of stuff. The most obvious one that most organizations suck at is vulnerability management, just keeping up with your vulns, right? I talk about this stuff all the time. There's lots of esoteric errors and reproducible builds and salsa threat models and attestations. At the end of the day, if most organizations would just keep up with their vulnerabilities, reporting them, and reduce the latency of getting patches out the door, we'd be a lot better off. And I guess the third bucket here is don't lie to us about your shit, otherwise we're going to fine you as well. Oh yeah, I tried to compress this to a slide to make it legible. The up to amount million is sort of how much the sort of straight fine if your global revenues are not much. The 2.5% is the greater of these two things. So if you have a lot of money, it can be up to 2.5 of your global revenues, right? So there's no sort of, the 15 million isn't the max. That's the low end of the you're not so big that you get to the percentages game. So how does open source fit into this? Well, let me tell you, it's been a journey. When the first draft of this legislation came out, it literally did not have the words open source in it anywhere at all. Not one single word. So they got some feedback. They took it really well. And they have identified a concept of a steward of open source that is super well defined. Including notions like non-commercial, right? So if you're building software in an open source context and you're not doing it for commercial reasons, then you are not a manufacturer of software. Anybody got a loophole they want to drive around this one? I can see 20 of them, right? We've already had a case where an open source maintainer who builds a project in open source, but also gets consulting revenue on the side for helping people work with it or integrate it or extend it or whatever like that, felt that they were going to be in a legal gray zone that they could not afford to deal with, and were ready to shut the project down. This actually came up from that Airflow beach cleaning effort, and the result was that the Airflow community worked with them to move that source code into a foundation context so the individual could work on it in an open source context and then do the consulting work on the side. We'll see how that plays out. But the notion of stewards has emerged as essentially as an organization that can provide certain guarantees around an open source project, will have some responsibilities, but will also be not subject to these ridiculously large fines. So what are those responsibilities? Well, you need to have a plan. You need to think about the source code that you are a steward of and have a cybersecurity plan. That's their terminology. This is what some AI spat out for me. At the end of the day, it comes down to what are we doing, right? Publishing what we're doing to the various, there's a thing called a market authority, I think in the term is the CRA or the EU thing. Essentially, these are the auditors and regulators that come into it. And you certainly need to have vuln management and vuln response processes for their projects. So just the usual, disclaimers. I am not a lawyer. I did stay in a Holiday Inn Express last night. Your mileage may vary, all the et cetera things. If you want to have an understanding about this in your organization, showing them my slides should only be used for fear-mongering, not actual decision-making. But you should be having a conversation within your organizations about what you're doing and how it relates to FreeBSD, which is really the point of this talk today. So what is in fact next? Well, I can tell you straight up, because I am involved in far too many places, that it will not be easy or free for an organization like FreeBSD Foundation or the community that is the FreeBSD community, which might be less structured in some sort of nonprofit or whatever organizational structures are around here, it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be free. There's work to do. I can also tell you that as a commercial organization, complying with the CRA will not be easy or free either. Right? There are things to have to do. So you have choices. You could stop doing business in Europe. That will not play out for most of you. So the questions I have for you and the conversation I want to start today, because I'm not bringing easy answers. I'm bringing hard problems. How will this community, FreeBSD, organize itself around this problem? Right? How will the vendors avoid the prisoner's dilemma of thinking, we'll do our own thing for our own stuff, because we're kind of a weird downstream fork. We'll let them sort it out, not our problem, whatever, right? How will the vendors collaborate with the rest of the community, with the foundation that can act as a steward, right? Has engineers whose title implies security responsibilities for the whole of our code base, right? And then how can we at Alpha Omega help, right? We're certainly not here to help the corporations make more money. That's not our job. That's your job. You've been pretty good at it. But we are here to help open source ecosystems establish themselves well and to become self-sustaining in a security context. So I probably blitzed past my timing here. It was pretty good. That's really what I wanted to start the conversation on, and I deliberately have time for discussion and questions. I also have this whole deck as a QR code or link that you can just copy if you want. But yeah, now's the point to bring up all the passive-aggressive questions you can come up with. You, sir.
At the end, you kind of said it, but just I want to reiterate. I assume that this applies to...
Hang on, David. Wait for the mic.
Here comes a microphone. I was going to repeat the question, but this is better.
You kind of said doing business, but I was waiting to find out about. Well, let me just state. I assume this is doing any form of business in Europe versus having the incorporation or any business company presence in Europe, i.e. channel sales.
Again, I am not a lawyer.
Well, for what you understand.
Yeah, but I think that if you have channel sales in that country, at its simplest, one might imagine the channel vendor would be labeled as the manufacturer. Like at the end of the day, if you're selling things with software, they don't care whether it came down on the back of a unicorn or we waved your hands, or you bought it from some guy on a truck who happens to be in San Jose. You're selling software into this market. So your channel vendor is either going to say, this is your problem, or they're going to say, I'm not taking this problem. Because
and if you're doing direct sales to
Europe, you're definitely on the hook.
Okay. 2, does whatever that law was specify that you also have to do SBOMs, which would list the open source and the versions that makes it very easy to see if you are incorporating an old vulnerable version.
Right.
Back to the transparency,
yeah,
companies trying to hide.
There's got to be a loophole, right?
I can. Well, no, it's hiding. It's
yeah.
Trying to hide what they're doing.
I can somewhat answer that. So the CRA is a law. It has its implementation is going to be defined by ETSI. That's
exactly.
ETSI. The European Telecommunications Standards Institute. They are doing standards processing right now. They are on an insane deadline.
Yep.
But they're producing 15 standards, I think, including things like operating systems, IoT devices, routers, et cetera, et cetera.
You'll be glad to know that they included 0 open source organizations in the standards making process.
That is not true.
The ORC has been consulted, but they're not allowed to be part of the organization because they're not a corporation.
You can be a member and make contributions as an open source person.
Oh, as an individual, you're a member of the thing, not representing a corporation?
Well, I am a member representing a corporation, but open source people can be brought in and contribute. There's a contributor from Debian on the operating system standard.
Yep.
So it is happening, but it is absolutely, without question, too late.
Yep.
Well, you could join right now, and if you get on it, you'll be able to influence the standard. But the initial standards are going to come out in the next couple months.
I would simplify this as whether you can influence it or not, you need to engage now so that you
Yes.
can understand the truck that's coming down the road towards you.
And I will say, so in the operating system standard, the rapporteur who is running that program has said, this isn't written down anywhere because it doesn't need to be written down, but there is no way that shipping a product that requires updates, which means it has a lifetime, any lifetime at all, will be possible if you don't have an SBOM.
Right.
You will simply not be able to comply with the law.
Sorry to follow up. For those that don't know, an SBOM is a software bill of materials, at least for U.S. vendors, or for any vendor selling to the U.S. government.
Right.
There was
FedRAMP.
Right. There was a executive order under Biden 2 years ago?
14028.
Yeah. That says you must supply SBOMs. So is Europe also following, are they mandating SBOMs as well in this thing?
I guess I would say de facto, I don't think, well, none of the ones I've looked at, I've only looked at the OS standard, which is quite a ways to go before it's final. I don't think they've written down, you must have an SBOM, but the requirements are impossible to meet otherwise.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that if you think about like how the SSDF describes, this is the NIST standard that the executive order referenced a lot, and FedRAMP has been on a steady diet of clauses from SSDF. SSDF has 3 columns: outcomes, sort of, recommended approaches, specific examples. The outcomes are what matter. When the auditor comes to knocking on your door, if you have found a way to make sure that the code you're shipping has no known vulnerabilities in it and is patched regularly when vulnerabilities are discovered and so forth, right? Whether you do it through SBOMs or through telekinesis, you're fine. As the gentleman pointed out, you're not going to be able to do it without SBOMs. No chance in hell. Other questions? In the back there, let's feed a micro. And while we're waiting for that, I don't know how this community organizes itself into working groups and the like, but you need to start, as a community, meeting about this and sharing things across the community about how you're doing it, because it is going to be a community problem unless you turn it into a tragedy of the commons. Yes?
Hey, sorry, I missed your presentation this time. Question probably not related to anything discussed right now, but I heard your presentation at the BSDCon this year, and I got interested. We had a brief chat with you back there. So I went to the site and filled the forms. Like 3 months passed, nothing. No email, no even acknowledgement.
I don't know which one you filled in, so let's chat offline. Our team, you're looking at, like, I work on this project about 20% of the time. The rest of the time I'm not working. And you're looking at the entire operational process team with some program management help. So if I drop the ball here, it's not even surprising. I'll loop back. The squeaky wheel does get some attention, so happy
I'll
to
keep
chat.
squeaking. Thank you.
I was just going to comment that the CRA sounds like the UK's TSA, which they promulgated some years ago and which impacts the telecom industry and therefore us. All the same requirements, and the goal there is that the big telcos in the UK and hence Europe are forced to beat up on their vendors because otherwise they get beat up on.
I think that's right, and I think that it sort of goes back to the reason I showed those strategy slides, the made-up strategy slides, right, is because the natural order of business does not incentivize prioritizing security the same way that regulation has to. And so when you're in a competitive space, growth wins over security, unfortunately, and consumers are usually the ones who pay the consequences. Regulations come in and say, we're going to level the playing field up here, and then it becomes no longer like we can't do this or we don't do this, we just get it done. Yeah?
Just a follow-up though. So I did upstream to FreeBSD a Mac module a couple of years ago that we are hopefully going to use to address some of this requirement, i.e. to make it painless to run daemons as non-root.
Oh, I love it.
So least privilege. It could probably use some more configurability. Right now, what's the word? The model is hard-coded. It needs to be configurable so that it's more generally useful. So I'd be interested if anybody's interested in collaborating on that. But the framework is there, and we are hopefully going to be rolling that out real soon now.
It's a great topic because when we talk about the scale and leverage point, right? If your path to security and fixing all the problems that you definitely have involves changing the behavior of every single developer working on the project so they become security experts, you're going to have a long time. And so things that can create points of leverage that we'd say, well, we can now move all of these services into this lower privilege environment, right, has dramatic impact also on the subsequent, not SBOM, but the essentially vulnerability assessment, right? Because when everything's running as root, then every vulnerability is essentially full power, full everything. We have a project that we're funding right now with Alpha Omega to do automated analysis to produce VEX statements. So if you think about SBOMs as the bill of materials, a VEX statement is an analysis relative to an SBOM and a vulnerability saying whether or not it is an actual problem in your code. And it allows downstream folks to be perhaps not as overwhelmed by changes and so forth, but it's expensive to produce those. So, any other questions? Well, with that, thank you very much. I appreciate the time. Look forward to seeing the conversations go on from here. And I don't know who's next, but welcome up.
I think we have a break next. Thank you very much, Michael.
My pleasure.
So yes, we do have we're about 20 minutes early, but we actually have a break for
Thank you for
lunch. So we'll be taking off. I think we have an extended break. We'll be back at 1:30 p.m. local time for our next talk. So now we get to have lunch. I believe lunch is over here, but I'll confirm with that. It is not quite ready, yes, because we asked for it. So we get to chat amongst ourselves for about 20 minutes. So have fun.